I stood there, helpless, as everything I'd worked for turned into roaring orange flames. And there she was watching with a smug smile, coffee in hand, like it was nothing more than a casual backyard gathering. Every petty rule, every unjust fine, every forced smile had been building to this moment. The heat I felt wasn't just from the fiery, it was the kind that burns in your chest when you realize someone's out to erase you completely. There comes a point when you stop asking, "Why me?" and start accepting that someone has made you their target. And when you spot their silhouette lingering outside your window at 2 in the morning, you know this isn't coincidence. But to understand how I ended up staring at my ranch in flames, we need to go back to the beginning. My name's Coleman, I'm 35, and before all this, I worked for the state investigating fires. Eventually, I got tired of cleaning up after other people's disasters. My mother, Evelyn, is 68 years old and a retired bank employee after 40 years at First National, had this wild idea: we should buy a 15-acre ranch together in Meadowbrook. It sounded like a dream. Horse stables, feed storage, organic gardens, the works. That dream soured 3 days after we moved in. Darla showed up at our door like she'd been waiting for the exact moment to strike. She was 38, blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a business suit to greet new ranch owners. In her hand, a thick packet of HOA rules. She smiled a smile that didn't touch her eyes and introduced herself as the HOA president. She flipped through the pages like she was running a boardroom meeting. "Just making sure you understand our community standards," she said. Something about the way she emphasized those 2 words made my skin prickle. Her boyfriend, Kevin, trailed behind her. He was 39. Built like the kind of guy who brags about construction projects but never actually finishes them. He nodded along to everything she said, throwing in little comments about property values and neighborhood image. Even then, I should have known they'd be trouble, but I was still in that polite, let's fit in phase. The trouble started small: a $50 fine for an improper flag display. Apparently our American flag was 6 inches wider than allowed. A $100 fine because my aunt parked overnight when she visited Mom for the weekend. I assumed this was the usual HOA nonsense that would fade once they saw we weren't looking to stir the pot. I couldn't have been more wrong. Every week, a new notice showed up, a new interpretation of some obscure rules that felt tailor-made to target us. The moment I truly understood what we were up against was when I saw what Darla did to our neighbors. They'd lived there for 12 years without a single issue. Then one day, she decided their wind chimes were excessive noise pollution and slapped them with a $200 fine every single day. Even after the husband took them down, she found more violations: grass too long, wrong mailbox color, guests parked too long. Within 6 months, they were bankrupted by the fines and legal fees, forced to sell their home. Then came the home meeting I'll never forget. 40 people in the community center, most avoiding my gaze. Darla stood at the front with a PowerPoint presentation complete with pictures of my ranch as if it were evidence in a criminal trial. "Mr. Coleman's agricultural activities are harming our property values and breaching multiple community standards," she announced, clicking through photos of our horses and gardens. "His ranch belongs in rural farmland, not our prestigious neighborhood." The room went silent. I could feel every stare on me like a weight. Darla went on, delivering a speech about how my lifestyle choices were affecting the community. Then she dropped the bomb: $5,000 in fines, due in 30 days or face legal action. $5,000 for having horses and a garden in a neighborhood where, when we moved in, both were supposedly allowed. Under the table, Mom squeezed my hand. I could see calculation in her eyes, the sharp, analytical look I'd seen her wear in boardrooms. When Darla finished her little performance and opened the floor for questions, Mom stood up, smiling sweetly. "Very thorough, Darla," she said in that deceptively gentle tone I knew meant trouble. "Since I spent 40 years in banking, I'd love to review the financial documentation for these fines to make sure everything is accounted for properly." The flicker in Darla's face told me Mom had just drawn a battle line. After the meeting, neighbors who used to wave suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. The empty house next door sat like a cautionary tale. Curtains twitched as Mom and I walked to the truck. That's when it really sank in. If this wasn't about rules or community pride, it was about control. And now, we were the next target. Kevin had been recording the entire meeting on his phone, muttering smug little asides about community improvement. His enjoyment of the whole ordeal should have told me something, but I was too furious to think clearly about his part in all this. That night, I sat on the porch, looking at our horses, wondering if moving here had been the biggest mistake of my life. The fines hurt, but the public humiliation hurt worse. Still, seeing Mom's determination lit a fire in me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about standing up to a bully hiding behind a title. Around 2 in the morning, Mom shook me awake. "Coleman," she whispered, pointing toward the window. "Look at the stables." I peered out into the dark and saw someone moving through the shadows, flashlight in hand, snooping around our feed storage and snapping photos. When the motion sensor light suddenly snapped on, the figure vanished into the darkness like they'd rehearsed the move before. Long after the vehicle pulled away, the faint, bitter trace of her perfume still hung in the air. Was Kevin out there conducting some kind of late-night surveillance, or was he laying the groundwork for something far worse? The 3 days after that midnight prowling felt like waiting for a storm you know is coming but can't see yet. I checked our security footage constantly, but whoever had been out there knew exactly where the cameras didn't reach. Meanwhile, Darla escalated her harassment with new violations popping up almost daily. Apparently, we'd committed an unauthorized garden expansion because we planted tomatoes a few feet from their original spot. Our horses, doing nothing but acting like horses, were now guilty of livestock noise disturbances. And my personal favorite, improper fence height, measured with what I swear was a magical ruler that gave different results depending on who was holding it. Part of me started to wonder if I was imagining the danger, that maybe this was just the usual HOA power trip nonsense. But Mom wouldn't let it go. 40 years in banking teaches you to spot patterns, she told me over breakfast. This isn't random. They're building towards something. I wanted her to be wrong, but I'd learned a long time ago that her instincts about people were rarely off the mark. 3 days after Kevin's little reconnaissance mission, I woke to the most terrifying sound I've ever heard. Our horses, thunder and lightning, shrieking in a way I'd never imagined animals could. It wasn't neighing, it was raw, soul-piercing terror. I threw back the curtain and froze. The stables were engulfed in a roaring inferno, flames climbing 20 feet into the sky. Even from our bedroom, the heat felt like it was pressing against my skin. My hands shook so violently I could barely dial 911 as I struggled into my clothes. The fire department later said they arrived in 31 minutes. To me, it felt like hours and hours of standing there, helpless, as everything we'd worked for burned. Thunder and lightning were gone by the time the flames died, along with our feet, our tools, our equipment, everything. The final damage estimate came to more than $200,000, but no number could capture the horror of hearing those screams and being powerless to save them. I still wake up at night hearing this sound. By sunrise, neighbors had gathered at what they must have thought was a respectful distance. To be fair, most looked genuinely shaken. Even some of Darla's usual cheerleaders seemed stunned. Mrs. Davis from 3 houses down brought coffee and sandwiches. The Wilsons offered help with cleanup. For a brief moment, I thought maybe this tragedy might thaw some of the ice in this neighborhood. Then Darla arrived, a new screw in tow, and slipped into her role like she'd been rehearsing it for weeks. "This tragedy impacts all of Meadowbrook," she told the cameras, perfectly centered in the frame. "The HOA will be creating a relief fund to help the Coleman family rebuild and to ensure nothing like this happens again." She even managed a single tear at just the right moment. I walked away before I said something that would end up on the 6 o'clock news. Kevin showed up an hour later, wearing an expression of exaggerated concern. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he repeated, scanning the wreckage like a man mentally cataloging it. I caught him snapping photos when he thought we weren't looking, and not with grief in his eyes, but with the detached focus of someone studying fire damage for professional reasons. That's when it hit me, this wasn't an accident. It was arson. The relief fund Darla set up took off fast. Guilt-driven donations rolled in, and within days she had over $15,000. Kevin volunteered to manage the money through his business account, citing tax purposes and proper documentation. At the time, it sounded reasonable. In hindsight, it was the first big red flag I missed. Sarah, our friendliest neighbor since the day we moved in, approached me that afternoon looking like she'd just come from a funeral. "I'm on a broken bar, I'm sorry," she said quietly, wringing her hands. "I can't help with your horses anymore. The HOA board came to my house this morning. A broken bar implied my property taxes could go up if I'm seen associating with a broken bar. Problem residents. That's what we were now, problem residents." While I wrestled with insurance claims and fire investigators, Mom quietly made her rounds, chatting with neighbors. She had a way of getting people to talk without realizing how much they were revealing. That evening, she sat me down. "People are scared, Coleman. Darla's been going house to house, reminding them about the family that used to live next door." But fear loosens lips, and I heard some interesting things about recent home meetings. On the second night after the fire, we stood in the charred remains of the stables when Kevin appeared again, wearing his concerned mask. "I know this is a tough time," he said, "but I'd like to offer my services for debris removal at cost. No markup, just labor and materials." He handed me his business card, explaining how efficiently his crew could handle the cleanup. But as he measured, I noticed his phone out again, logging details that had nothing to do with hauling away burned wood. His expression shifted from fake sympathy to the sharp focus of someone analyzing burn patterns, moving with the precision of a man who understood fire far too well for a neighborhood contractor. Watching him, I realized Kevin wasn't just offering cleanup. He already knew exactly what had happened here. I couldn't shake the thought of Kevin had been there when the fire started. The way he prowled through the wreckage afterward, analyzing rather than grieving, gnawed at me. Most people offering help after a disaster focus on rebuilding. Kevin, he seemed more interested in studying the way the flames had eaten through the structure, as if he needed confirmation that things had unfolded exactly as intended. But why? And what possible plan could involve burning down our stables? It was dawning on me that this went far beyond petty HOA harassment. Kevin's shadow stretching over the blackened beams felt like an omen I couldn't ignore. The week following the fire, Darla found new ways to tighten her grip. Publicly, she played the role of our rescuer, but privately, she used the incident to justify stricter neighborhood rules, rules clearly designed to drive out anyone who didn't fit her vision. One in particular drew more outrage than she expected: a ban on displaying military decorations. Darla's reasoning: veteran service medals disrupted the visual consistency of the neighborhood. Telling veterans they couldn't honor their service because it might hurt property value. As a broken bar, that was the moment I knew she'd finally pushed too far. I just didn't yet know how to use it. Mom, meanwhile, had been uncharacteristically quiet since the fire, spending her days reading HOA bylaws and making discreet calls to old banking colleagues. When she told me over breakfast that she'd volunteered for the brand new Community Beautification Committee, I thought she was distracting herself from the loss. "I want to understand how this HOA really works," she said. 40 years in banking taught me that if money's being mismanaged, it always leaves a trail. She approached her first committee meeting like an undercover auditor, posing as a well-meaning retiree interested in fiscal responsibility. She casually asked, "I noticed we're spending $3,000 a month on landscaping. For such a small neighborhood, that seems a bit high. Perhaps we should review the contracts to ensure we're getting fair value?" It sounded like innocent curiosity, but it was bait. And it worked. Through committee access, Mom uncovered that Kevin's company had been paid over $40,000 in the past year for maintenance work that was either overpriced or never done at all. Bush trimming billed at $1,500 that any legitimate landscaper would handle for $30. Kevin was milking the hoe, and Darla was signing off without hesitation. Then Mom found something that made her go pally: a glossy promotional flyer for the future site of Pinnacle Shopping Complex, with groundbreaking scheduled for just 6 months after we moved in. "Coleman," she said grimly, "they wanted our land from the start." The harassment was part of the plan. The same week, I received a threat that still makes my skin crawl. "Not another violation notice. This came from an encrypted email address. End your investigation now, or your remaining animals will join the horses. We know your schedule, your mother's routines, and every weak point on your property. This is your only warning." This wasn't Darla's brand of passive-aggressive bullying. It was cold, calculated, and professional. Someone had been tracking USA, documenting our movements, Noting our vulnerabilities, Darla and Kevin felt too amateur to pull off surveillance this meticulous, but there was no doubt they were involved. Mom and I doubled down. We began documenting every suspicious HOA expenditure, every questionable fine, and every connection between enforcement actions and Kevin's profits. The pattern was undeniable. Properties hit with repeated violations often ended up with Kevin's company providing services afterward. Families unable to pay their fines eventually sold their home usually to buyers who magically never faced violations. It was a machine, funneling money and property into the hands of a select few. The military decoration ban unexpectedly brought us allies. Tom Wilson, a Marine veteran 4 houses down, approached me while I was getting the mail. "I heard about your horses," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "I've been keeping notes on HOA harassment for a year. Want to compare?" Finally someone else who saw the pattern. Through Tom, more neighbors began to share their own stories. Endless fines during their daughter's wedding preparations, violations for vegetable gardens too close to property line as a broken bar always followed by Kevin's company benefiting somehow. The cycle repeated over and over. Then, late one night, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was barely above a whisper. "Coleman, this is Patricia from the HOA board. I can't talk long. There's more going on here than harassment. They're planning a phase 2 acquisitions, and your property is the key. Meet me at the old diner on Route 9 tomorrow at 8. If you want to know what you're really fighting." When I looked at recent meeting minutes, I saw it for myself. The references to optimal property utilization, coordinated redevelopment initiatives, and outside investor partnerships. The language was vague enough to skirt the law, but the intent was clear. Darla's so-called enforcement was just the first step in a much bigger plan to remake our community, and it all started with forcing people like us out. As we pieced together the timeline of property transfers, an unsettling pattern emerged. Every homeowner subjected to harassment occupied land that was either adjacent to another targeted property or situated in a strategically important part of the neighborhood. This wasn't random enforcement or petty vendettas, it was a calculated acquisition plan. Our old neighbor's house, our ranch, and several veterans' homes all occupied parcels that would be invaluable for a complete redevelopment project. With her decades in banking, Mom began tracing the money flow. What she found suggested federal-level crimes, not just minor HOA fraud. The methodical targeting across property lines, paired with interstate links in Kevin's business records, hinted at a potential case for organized crime prosecution. "This is structured like a laundering operation," she explained, pointing to the patterns. "But they're not just cleaning dirty money, they're securing high-value land for something much bigger." The puzzle pieces finally locked into place when we learned their focus was on properties holding water rights, marked in red on detailed survey maps. Patricia's warning about Phase 2 now felt terrifyingly clear. Our financial sleuthing eventually led us to a company called J&K Maintenance, officially tied to a contractor named Jim. He wasn't connected to our veteran neighbor Tom despite a similar background. We tracked Jim down to a shabby workshop on the industrial side of town, littered with unfinished projects and radiating a don't ask questions vibe. The moment we mentioned Kevin's name, his defensiveness confirmed his involvement before he even spoke. "I don't know anything about your fire," he blurted, edging toward the door like he was mapping out an escape route. "There's been trouble around here lately, a kid's messing with property, causing damage. Maybe you should talk to the police." His voice wavered, but his eyes betrayed more than nervousness. This was fear. I decided to test him with a lie. "Jim, your business card turned up near our feed storage after the fire," I said, watching him closely. "The fire marshal is eager to talk to you about your connection to the site." The blood drained from his face instantly, and his hands began to tremble. It was all the proof I needed that he was hiding something important. Under pressure, Jim started spilling. He admitted to producing fake invoices for Kevin, claiming he had no part in the fire itself. "Kevin said it was for tax purposes," he said, wringing his hands. "I didn't ask too many questions. I just did the paperwork and took my cut." The false billing scheme was only the surface. Jim described a system of phony maintenance contracts funneling money from multiple HOA communities, doubling as cover for other activities he claimed not to fully understand. That same afternoon, Things escalated when 3 black SUVs pulled into our driveway. Out stepped Darla, Kevin, and what appeared to be a professional film crew. They erected surveying equipment and hammered future development site signs along our fence lineal without permission or legal authority. Darla stood there like she owned the property, barking orders while Kevin measured boundaries with what looked like official equipment. From what Jim knew, Pinnacle wasn't just planning retail space. The development would include hidden federal shipping routes and secure data storage facilities possibly tied to multi-state laundering operations. Then Jim dropped the real bomb. Kevin had mentioned something called Operation Queen, which involved clearing targeted properties for federal contracts. A county official, Commissioner David Sona, was allegedly fast-tracking their permits. What Jim described made our HOA harassment seem like a warm-up act for a much larger scheme. He admitted Kevin had a mysterious partner known only as the coordinator, who handled communication with federal contacts and made the real decisions. Jim never met this person but overheard Kevin taking instructions during hushed phone calls. Realizing our horses had been collateral damage in a high-level development plan left me furious in a way revenge alone couldn't satisfy. This was no longer about getting even, it was about dismantling the whole machine before it crushed more communities. But it also meant we were up against people with serious resources, political connections, and the willingness to intimidate anyone in their way. Mom, using her banking skills, dissected the financial structures Jim described, finding even more indicators of federal crimes. The web spanned multiple neighborhoods, crossed state lines, and followed a precise strategy for seizing valuable, resource-rich land. The interstate connections we'd uncovered weren't just a curious itch, they provided enough for major charges under organized crime laws. Mom studied Jim's revelations with her banker's precision and concluded, this isn't small-town graft. It's the framework of a federal conspiracy that could be operating across dozens of neighborhoods, targeting hundreds of properties. We were on our way out of Jim's cluttered workshop when his voice stopped us. Desperation bled through every word. But there's one more thing, he said, scanning the lot as though someone might be watching. Kevin told me Phase 3 starts this weekend. He called it neutralizing remaining obstacles. I don't know exactly what that means, a broken bar, but after what happened to your horse, his voice broke off, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. If obstacles meant us, then the escalation could shift from destroying property to harming people. The fact that their timeline matched our own progress toward exposing Operation Queen was no coincidence. Someone in their circle clearly knew we were getting closer and decided to move faster. Before we could respond, Jim yanked open a desk drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and pressed it into my hands. This is what you're up against, he whispered. The weight of it felt literal and figurative, and judging by the sweat on his brow, I wasn't sure if what it contained would save USA or sign our death warrant. Kevin's next move blindsided me. I'd expected more harassment or some crude intimidation tactic, but instead, he orchestrated a last-minute community meeting featuring a man introduced as Captain Robert Hayes, a retired fire marshal. Hayes carried himself with the authority of someone whose credentials made him instantly believable. With practiced composure, Hayes laid out a meticulous explanation of how the fire had supposedly started, pinning the blame squarely on me. According to his expert analysis, I had carelessly stored flammable materials too close to heat sources, violating fire safety rules and essentially setting the stage for disaster. I could feel the tide of public opinion shift in real time. Neighbors who had stood beside us now looked uncertain, their expressions tinged with doubt as Hayes explained he'd transfer principles and fire progression like a man who'd testified in countless trials. But Hayes didn't know what I knew. Hidden cameras I'd installed after Kevin's suspicious midnight visit had recorded him meeting Hayes behind the community center 2 days earlier. The footage showed Kevin handing over an envelope thick with cash and coaching Hayes on exactly what conclusions to draw. Kevin even provided photos of our property and talking points to weave into the narrative. This wasn't an investigation, it was a performance. When I tried to present the footage at the meeting, I barely got the chance. Instead of lunging for my laptop, Kevin shouted, "Fire, emergency, evacuate," and yanked the building's alarm. The chaos was instant, a neighbor scrambling for the exits, my laptop ripped from my hands, and Kevin vanishing in the confusion. The old wooden beams of the community center groaned under the rush of 40 panicked people. The fire alarm's shrill wail drilled into my skull, and not because of the noise, but because it marked the moment our strongest piece of evidence slipped away. As I stood frozen, debating whether to call for help or quietly start rebuilding our case, the real fire department arrived. Kevin's stunt had an unintended consequence. Tampering with emergency systems is a crime in itself. Investigators soon found his fingerprints on the pull station, adding federal charges for interfering with emergency services and endangering the public to his already growing list of offenses. And in that swirl of commotion, I spotted something odd while the rest of the crowd surged toward the main exits. Patricia Wells was quietly slipping away in the opposite direction. I had barely paid attention to HOA board member Patricia Wells before, but I noticed her slip quietly out the back door during the chaos, speaking urgently into her phone. Following her into the parking lot, I overheard enough to make my stomach tighten. Phase 3 needs to accelerate. They're getting too close to the coordination center. Up until then, I'd been fixated on Darla and Kevin, never realizing there was a third conspirator operating right under our noses. Patricia's unassuming presence had kept her off my radar, yet she was clearly a major player. Even with Kevin's ridiculous stunt at the meeting, Captain Hayes's testimony had done its damage. The community was now split down the middle, half siding with the professional fire marshal's version, the other half suspecting the HOA of manipulation. The disagreement created perfect cover for the real criminals, who could continue their scheme while the rest of the neighborhood argued about who was telling the truth. Later, I learned Patricia owned property bordering every lot that had been targeted for harassment, to prime real estate that would soar in value once Pinnacle's development reshaped the market. She was the link between the local troublemakers and their higher-level contacts, a hidden coordinator quietly steering a multi-state operation from her HOA seat. Meanwhile, investigators began pressing Kevin about the false fire alarm. His answers didn't match his earlier statements about the ranch fire, and the cracks in his story widened. You can only juggle so many lies before they start to contradict each other, and Kevin was losing control. His nervous tics, a jaw grinding, thumb twitching over his phone, he told me the pressure was getting to him. I wrestled with a decision that kept me awake for nights: keep pushing forward and risk even more danger, or step aside and let the feds take over. We were on the brink of uncovering everything, but the threat to my family was escalating fast. While Kevin was tied up with questioning, my mom took a different approach. She struck up a conversation with Captain Hayes, showering him with praise for his thorough investigation. Her gentle charm disarmed him, and before long, he let slip that Kevin had paid him and Darla had fed him the exact conclusions to present. Mom's background in banking had taught her how to coax information out of people without them even realizing it. Patricia's phone call had mentioned the coordination center, implying a physical headquarters where the whole criminal operation was managed. This wasn't just a few shady HOA dealings, it was a well-organized infrastructure for property grabs and interstate money laundering. Kevin and Darla were clearly just mid-level players. When Kevin was finally released, he locked eyes with me from across the parking lot. His gaze wasn't angry, it was calculating, like he was already setting the next move in motion. That's when I spotted Patricia driving not toward her home, but in the direction of our ranch. Whatever Phase 3 was, it wasn't a plan waiting to happen, it had already begun. Federal involvement came sooner than I could have imagined, and from an unexpected direction. Agent Emily from the FBI reached out with news that shifted everything. The feds had been tracking suspicious money transfers linked to Pinnacle Development for months as part of a multi-state money laundering investigation. Our evidence had been the missing piece connecting local HOA corruption to a conspiracy stretching across 12 states and hundreds of millions of dollars. Under questioning, Kevin's bravado collapsed. He confessed to arson, embezzlement, and conspiracy, but tried to downplay his role by pointing the finger at Karen as the mastermind with federal connections. Even then, he couldn't resist painting himself as just a guy following orders. Karen, of course, had no intention of facing federal charges. Instead of bolting to Mexico, she slipped into a luxury mountain resort under the alias Catherine Mills, using her sister's credit cards. She thought the remote setting would buy her time to destroy evidence and arrange an escape through her network. Overconfidence had always been her flaw. Mom devised a clever trap. Knowing Patricia was still in contact with Karen, she planted a false letter claiming we'd found new evidence in our barn that implicated federal agencies in the conspiracy. The goal was to panic Karen into breaking cover and reaching out to her shadowy contacts. With Agent Emily's help, we began piecing together the final proof needed to take down Operation Queen for good. I even sent up my drone to capture surveillance on key locations. I captured drone footage of the creek weaving through all the targeted properties, clearly showing how each parcel of land belonging to harassment victims was connected, almost like it was part of a deliberate network for resource control. Mom and I spent hours tucked away in a small downtown diner booth, combing through stacks of financial records while Agent Emily's team kept tabs on Patricia's communications. Meanwhile, we secretly recorded Kevin trespassing on neighboring land, adding another piece to the puzzle of their coordinated crimes. The bait worked flawlessly. Karen, rattled and reckless, broke her own security habits. She logged into her personal email from the resort's public computer center, trying to send encrypted messages to her so-called federal coordination contacts who likely didn't exist. That single digital slip gave the FBI her exact location in seconds. Under pressure, even the most careful criminals can be undone by a simple mistake. It turned out Pinnacle Development was nothing more than a polished front for laundering cartel money through real estate deals in multiple states. Operation Queen wasn't about building commercial centers or even siphoning HOA funds. It was a sophisticated machine for transforming drug profits into legitimate property holdings. The operation's reach was staggering, running quietly in dozens of communities like ours. Patricia Wells eventually led federal agents straight to the coordination center, a retrofitted warehouse equipped with advanced communications gear, ledgers, and planning documents. Inside, rows of servers and encrypted devices hummed alongside massive wall maps marked with targeted neighborhoods across the country. One wall was plastered with coded postcards from operatives bragging about successful property takeovers nationwide. Despite their precision and reach, they made one fatal oversight: a systematic harassment leaves systematic evidence. Every notice, every bogus fine, every forced sale left a trail that, when pieced together, exposed their entire network. Karen's arrest at the mountain resort almost felt anticlimactic. Agents caught her in the middle of burning papers in the fireplace, but by then most evidence had already been preserved digitally. Her sister, complicit in providing fake IDs and laundering support, was also taken into custody. The warehouse records confirmed Patricia's role as the local link, managing the flow of information between Pinnacle's cartel-backed financiers and neighborhood-level operatives like Karen and Kevin. Her arrest cracked open the full command hierarchy and gave prosecutors everything they needed to dismantle the network in multiple states. Operation Queen was far darker than I had imagined. They deliberately targeted affluent communities with weak oversight, using harassment to drive down property values, then flipping those properties for huge gains, all while washing cartel funds through the transactions. As I watched Karen being escorted away in cuffs, the motive behind our suffering became painfully clear. Our horses hadn't died by accident. They were part of erasing evidence that our ranch was an active, lived-in property. We weren't just inconvenient neighbors, we were witnesses they couldn't risk keeping around. Agent Emily told us the county sheriff's office and town council had scheduled a public session for the following week to reveal the full scope of Operation Queen. The timing would guarantee maximum exposure and lock in legal protection for the evidence. Then she dropped the detail that made everything click. Our ranch sat on top of oil and natural gas reserves worth about $40 million. Pinnacle's geological surveys had confirmed it, and from the start, their goal had been to grab the mineral rights for a fraction of the value. That's why the harassment had been relentless, why they'd risked arson, and why the entire conspiracy had focused so intently on forcing us off the land. Once the feds understood the size and interstate nature of the scheme, asset forfeiture moved fast. Every property, account, and resource tied to the laundering network was seized, creating a massive restitution pool for victims. Because our case had blown the operation wide open, our family received significant compensation, far more than what we lost in the fire. And when the sheriff's inspection finally happened, flanked by federal agents and a swarm of reporters, it felt like the most satisfying moment in the entire ordeal. News helicopters captured the moment sheriff's deputies and federal agents removed the unauthorized future development signs that Karen's crew had planted during their illegal survey. Cameras rolled as she was escorted away in handcuffs, still trying to claim a non-existent diplomatic immunity. The contrast between her earlier smug media appearances and her public arrest was poetic justice. The federal trial moved swiftly thanks to overwhelming evidence and a steady stream of witnesses eager to cooperate for lighter sentences. Karen was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison for money laundering, conspiracy, and racketeering, along with a $4.7 million restitution order. Kevin was given 22 years for arson, fraud, and conspiracy, plus a lifetime ban from any construction or HOA-related work. Patricia Wells, convicted of acting as the local coordinator, received 18 years and was formally designated a domestic terrorist. The town council's live-streamed session following the arrests drew tens of thousands of viewers. Agent Emily laid out the full Operation Queen case, dismantling Karen's false narrative piece by piece with hard evidence via financial records, wiretaps, and video surveillance. The public reaction was immediate. An outpouring of support for our family and outrage at the scope of the scheme. Pinnacle Development's executives were soon facing congressional hearings and federal prosecution under RICO laws, with testimony exposing deeper layers of political corruption and regulatory manipulation. Federal authorities overturned every forced sale that had occurred in communities targeted by Operation Queen. Families driven from their homes through harassment got their properties back along with full compensation for their losses. Watching the Hendersons return to their home, smiling through tears, was one of the most gratifying moments of the entire ordeal. Months later, Karen's legal team tried a last-ditch bargain offering cartel intel in exchange for a reduced sentence. They even had the nerve to ask me to testify on her behalf. My answer was short and final. She had deliberately destroyed families for her own gain, and her punishment should stand as a warning. I told the prosecutor, on record, that I would not support any leniency. The case sparked nationwide HOA reform laws, introducing federal oversight, annual audits, whistleblower protections, and jurisdiction over systematic harassment cases. With restitution funds and income from the mineral rights beneath our land, we rebuilt the ranch as a model of sustainability of fire-resistant systems, expanded programs for veterans, and a memorial garden for thunder and lightning. That garden became a gathering place for the community, a symbol of resilience born from tragedy. Our investigation methods were later incorporated into federal training programs, helping law enforcement dismantle similar organized crime schemes in dozens of other states. The ripple effect was enormous: hundreds of arrests, billions in recovered assets, and one of the largest money laundering operations in U.S. history brought to light. Justice and liberty, our new horses, now graze in secure, open pastures. Our once fractured community had transformed into one bound by mutual vigilance and trust. A year after the trials, an elderly man left an envelope at our gate containing vintage photos of our ranch from the 1940s and a handwritten note. Your grandfather would be proud. Some secrets are worth protecting. A friend of the family. I never learned his name, but his words reminded me that this land holds stories far deeper than we know. Standing with Mom on the porch we rebuilt from the ashes, watching the valley glow under a sunset more beautiful than I remembered, I felt the weight of all we had survived. Karen and Kevin believed they could erase our future, but instead, their crimes lit the spark that turned us into guardians of our home and defenders of other families like ours. As I brushed Justice's mane, Mom summed it up perfectly. They wanted a monument to greed. We built a foundation for justice that will last for generations. Sometimes, destruction doesn't end a story, it forges something stronger.